Our next session talks really about the impact of COVID on cloud and community. All of our lives have been impacted because of COVID, right? I think especially what we've seen here at DigitalOcean, supporting startups, supporting developers around the world, we've seen that change. Internally as a company, lots of things have changed for us, and we wanted to check in with the community, ask how things are with all of you, and we brought together a whole bunch of panelists from really different verticals, people who are enabling the community, people who are enabling entrepreneurial startup ecosystems around the world, and people who are powering up cloud infrastructure for hundreds and thousands of businesses around the world. And to moderate this session, I have the privilege of welcoming Soren, who is the CEO of CloudFest. With that, over to you, Soren.
Thank you very much, Mohan. Just before we start, how's everyone doing? You have to wake up after the afternoon break right now, so afternoon tea break. So let Mohan and his team know if you like this conference and what he organized here so far together with his team. If you like that, please give a kudos right now in the chat. I know for a fact how to run a conference, you know, on a normal year like 2019 at CloudFest, we have close to 10,000 people coming from the so-called cloud service provider industry. We organized that event in a theme park, which is the biggest in Europe, actually. So it's like 10,000 people, you know, for 1 week locked into a theme park without any kids. This is what I do for my daily life. You know, this year is different, obviously. And we were one of the first ones who had to cancel CloudFest in early, I know it was mid-February already when we canceled it, end of February. And so this year went completely different, obviously. So in the early days of lockdown, I started an interview series where I interviewed executives from large cloud service providers, such as executives from GoDaddy, Wix, 1&1, Yonos, and so on, what they think this pandemic will bring us, this whole lockdown. And this was in the early days. And I think no one back then even saw what kind of potential it gave to the cloud industry. So I'm kind of a community guy for the cloud service provider industry. Together with me today on this panel, I have 4 amazing panelists who all in one way or another lead a specific community. So today we want to get the feedback from them, what they learned from the specific communities they are serving, what they learned the last couple of months, as well as what is happening short to midterm. Before we start, we do a short introduction round, and we start with the ladies, of course. Holly from DigitalOcean, what is the community you serve? And tell us a little bit more about yourself, please.
Yes, so happy to be here today. Really excited. So thank you, Soren. My name is Holly Hagans. I'm the manager of the global community relations team here at DigitalOcean, meaning working with individual practitioners all the way up to small businesses, all of the startups in between there. So really a large community, global community facing different needs depending on the region. So happy to be here and chatting about the different needs for the community amongst this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Holly. Francesca, you're next. Tell us a little more about you and SeedStars.
Yeah, next lady to introduce herself. So as you rightfully said, my name is Francesca and I work at SeedStars. So SeedStars is a company whose mission is really to enable to create a positive impact on emerging markets through, on the one hand, technology, and on the other hand, entrepreneurship. So what we do overall is we create a community, we run programs to support the endeavors of tech startups on emerging markets, and we also are an impact investor. So we also eventually invest in some of the startups that we work with. I myself manage the MENA region at SeedStars and act as one of their venture capital analysts.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca. Hugo, let's move on to Lisbon. What are you doing at Techstars? Tell us more about Techstars.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, for having me here. And I'm a huge fan of the DigitalOcean, so it's a pleasure not only to talk about the community, but also to be part of the conference. Well, my responsibilities as a managing director of Techstars program in Lisbon in partnership with SmapperNext. So Techstars is a global network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. We every year invest in 10 companies and try to condense 2 years of work within 12 weeks. Gets pretty crazy. This year, we did that through the pandemic. We started in person in March and then went virtual during the program during the pandemic. And we can talk about that if it's necessary. And we do it with the help of SmapperNext, that is a venture capital firm that has 40 million euros to invest. They are based here in Lisbon, but they have a European approach. And we do invest globally in companies. So happy to talk about companies from LA to Brisbane in Australia, where we've been making investments here in Lisbon.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Lucas, last but not least.
Yes, hello everyone, and also from my side, thank you very much for the invitation. Very glad to be in a panel where Søren is moderator, who hired me like 17 years ago, literally. So I'm 17 years or plus in the service provider industry. We work with DigitalOcean as one of our fastest growing partner as a company, but globally, Plesk and its other products that are part of our family are running over 900,000 servers and about 70 million websites. So we provide all the tools for what we call web professionals. These are agencies, developers that basically use Plesk and other products to simplify their lives and manage and build websites, specifically WordPress. And yeah, we have a multitude of communities. So we have about 3,000 service providers like DigitalOcean and others. Then their end customers, it's mostly SMBs and web professionals. Personally, I'm also involved in as a mentor in startups, so a growth mentor, and I work very close with the SaaS community and stuff. So yeah, glad to be here and see how hopefully that they can contribute something useful.
Yeah, cool. Thanks everyone for the short introduction round. So I think the first question is for all of you, but we keep it a little bit more generic before we move into the details of each of one of your programs. So, I mean, like we said, we are all in one way or another, the community builders. So what are your thoughts on the community you are serving? So what have you seen, like saying end of February, starting of March, up until now? Like how did the timeline look like if you look at your main community? Hugo, do you want to start with that? You're nodding.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's okay. Well, I think that the first, I'll just give some bullet points very quickly. A drop of revenue, right? For the startups, clearly there was a drop of revenue. It was kind of more for some companies, like we invested in companies in the travel sector, and so it was 95% drop of revenue, less on others that are not dependent on that. We also saw, some increase in revenue in companies that had to do businesses in deliveries, and of course the growth of e-commerce led to more delivery services, and they benefit. But in general, drop of revenue. I think there is a different period between March and April where the world paused, and so there is a pause. No one was replying emails. Everyone was trying to figure out their personal lives first, and I think starting in May, things picked up. From a business point of view, commercial point of view, customers getting back to emails, engaging in conversations in sales, but also investors. And we've seen now, between May and now, much more investment and much more growth in business, but also in businesses where the budgets are there to make business. And we can get more into that later, but this is kind of a short summary on my end.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much, Hugo. Francesca, anything from the startup community from your perspective to add on the timeline?
Yeah, definitely agree with what Hugo said. Of course, it's what we observed is very, very similar. Now, if we look at the community in terms of how a group of people work together, we see that there has been a recentering on how to be efficient. People started focusing on if you look, for example, at the Eisenhower metric, people started really focusing on what's urgent and what's important. The rest really wasn't a priority. We've also seen a rise of questions around how to keep energy levels high, right? We see that a lot of people had, again, as Hugo said, to figure out what happens at a personal level and at a business level at the same time, really putting the well-being and the energy question at the forefront of people's priorities. And I think this really shows how the professional/personal thin line really got even thinner with the disappearance of the physical separation between one and the other, which I think also had a great impact on the workflow and of course the workplace of the community as a whole. Indeed leading to a standstill for a few weeks and slowly to getting back to work with, of course, the summer in the middle, and hopefully everything will start getting back on track the way it was late February in the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Holly, what was your perspective serving the variety of communities actually which DigitalOcean has, but let's specifically focus on startups and SMBs and developers, the three of them. What did you see among those three different verticals basically on the growth? I mean, we heard some specific feedback from the startup community. Was that similar to what you see with other verticals, or is it completely different?
No, absolutely. I mean, Hugo stated exactly what we saw, where we saw a lot of the travel startups and a lot of the in-person customer experience type startups really take a huge drastic revenue hit, but then also thinking about how they can quickly pivot their business. And one thing that we have seen across the board that I do want to note is the a rise of what customer service looks like, because nobody can lose any customers. So what does that excellence and service look like no matter what across the board for all the startups? So we did see a lot of the startups that are working with DigitalOcean really inquire about what does that excellence look like? What are resources? How can we make sure that even, we can't lose one customer to make sure that they're still having an excellent experience while they stay on board with the companies. So that is something that we have seen across the board.
Okay, thank you very much, Holly. Lucas, I mean, we work in the cloud service provider industry for 20 years or something like that, almost. We've seen a lot of things coming and going, and I think we both have a very clear understanding about that market. And I mean, I was surprised basically how resilient like this cloud service provider community is, and how much it really leveraged like from small to large service providers, basically the current situation of 100% digitalization of SMBs. How was it for you at Plesk? I mean, what did you particularly do to help cloud service providers put the right offers in place which are needed during this lockdown phase?
I must say I was not so much focusing on the service providers, to be very honest, because for us, a partner like DigitalOcean is a distribution channel for our software. So I was focusing a lot on the SMB part, and I think all the other participants here have been talking a lot about developers. I think SMBs are the end consumers of our services here in many cases, actually even for SaaS startups as well. So in our case, the end customer of a web professional is an SMB who needs a website, and then he needs a store. And I think one learning or a key learning was, even from my own personal network of SMBs and entrepreneurs, that we were thinking for ages, everybody has a website, everybody has a store. Honestly, by far not true. I had people coming to me asking me for things like file sharing, because they didn't know what it is and they need it now. They asked for, can you quickly maybe do an e-commerce store? I can tell you some other deeper stories afterwards about SMBs, but what is happening there is bringing us and the service providers working with us as partners huge opportunities. And yeah, there is a bit of a fight going on. Do you use Plesk or our other product cPanel to manage your infrastructure on DigitalOcean, or do I just go to Shopify or to Wix and build and manage my website there? I think there are some very unclear developments, but I think the potential is huge. And we actually have seen even a pretty significant growth in the last few months also for ourselves. So yeah, I think I could go a bit deeper in SMB, but probably on a later stage.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks a lot, Lucas. Let's talk a little bit about the trends in this startup ecosystem. I think in the cloud, it's very clear, there was a lot of demand, it was steadily growing and so on. And with the startup industry or the startup community ecosystem, there was more happening. Hugo and Francesca, how would you define it? Like the last 6 months, like how did the perceptions change? Like, let's say, on type of investments you are doing. Like, are you looking into more resilient startups or potential more resilient startups? Is there another way to look into it? Like, what are or in other words, what are the succeeding and what are the losing startups in the time which we are in? Francesca, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Indeed, very relevant as it has impacted the way we work overall. I think what has definitely changed in the way we look at startups is the sectoral approach. What sectors do you today invest in? But in reality, the question that goes before the investment question is the question of how do you support the startups? How do you do emergency relief prior to sending the actual aid to the startup, right? I mean, I'm putting it a bit simplistically, but in reality, that's what we're looking at, right? We have seen over the course of the past 6 months, three main changes. The first one is, of course, a significant drop in consumer demand for the startups. The second one is a drop in direct investments that VC make, even for startups that already had term sheets, etc. And the third element is, of course, a lot of layouts or hours of work cut amongst the startups. So if we zoom in, the first shockwave, as we could call it, is actually the capital side. The second shockwave is the demand side, and the direct consequence of this is the impact it has on the functioning of the startup. If we look at capital, there have been many studies written about this. I think some people like Startup Genome did a good job at surveying their community and getting stats out of this. And if we look at the stats that they produced from their batch of startups worldwide, we see that a lot of startups, so 40% of the startups today, are in what they call the red zone. What's the red zone? The red zone is a zone where the startups have less than 3 months of capital runway to run their startup. So that's, I mean, it's a very critical time for a startup, right? So here comes the whole reflection of how do you support them and how do you later invest or do a follow-on investment on the investment that has already been made. So that's the first element when it comes to capital. The second element is, of course, a massive disruption in the process of fundraising. So as I mentioned, even startups that already had term sheets, their investment super delayed or even canceled. So I mean, it really is a shock for the startups. And the third element is that the VC funding has dropped across the world. I mean, if we look at China, for example, which of course is an extreme example because it's probably not the right wording, but it's like the flagship country that first witnessed Corona. We see that China had a 50% drop in VC investments between January and March. After March, they started going back up, but they didn't reach the pre-crisis level. So, I mean, it's quite a significant trend at the global level. It is estimated, but again, it's super hard to produce stats on such a short time frame that the VC investments have dropped by approximately 20%. So it's 1/5 less than what it was before. So I think these are the three key elements when it comes to capital. And I don't know if Hugo has the same learnings. I see him nod. But if we look at the demand side, which is the second big element that impacted the startup community as a whole, we see that a solid 70% of the startups had their revenue drop drastically since the beginning of the crisis. So on the one hand, they're experiencing a decline in the demand for their customers. They're losing customers. And of course, startups that are in industries that were super heavily hit, such as tourism, I mean, even fashion and beauty, transportation. I mean, all these fields saw a reduction by nearly half of their demand, which of course is a massive shock to absorb for a small company that is still counting the amount of months that it can run its operations for before going out of business, right? And so, of course, all of this resulted in treasury cuts in the budgets of the startups, which led to layoffs. And layoffs, we see that layoffs happen mostly on positions related to direct sales, marketing, and R&D also got cut quite a bit. So that's kind of the main points that we observed in the startup community on our end. I don't know, Hugo, whether you observed the same elements from Europe and from maybe a more developed economies.
Yeah, I think there are many commonalities. I do think that the most common word used is cash, and cash is actually the key success factor for the startups 1 year from now. And what we did was trying to see what were the lessons that we could learn from what happened in 2008, in 2000, 2001, with the attacks in New York, and see, because that was more external factor and not a systemic finance issue. And cash was the thing that actually made most companies succeed. The category leaders too came in as number one after the period. In this case of the pandemic, of the economic recession. I think cash is the main. I think that you mentioned something that not always is talked much, but I would like also to stress it, that there's been layoffs, which is, there is, of course, it's not a good situation if you are in that position, but it's great from a talent point of view. And that's one of the things that we talked with our companies. There's going to be a lot of great talent out there. It's going to be a great opportunity to actually get talent in companies that otherwise would not have an opportunity to get talent. And also that talent is creating new companies, and those companies are already being funded, which is also great. And obviously, I think there's going to be a trade-off between growth and sales and margin, because growth now is at all costs is something to be careful about. And maybe the last thing I would say that kind of also I think it's interesting for the conference here is that we've been stressing a lot in focusing on products and product development. And if the demand is not there, just focus on building your product now, and go and get more talent on the engineering, on the product side, and focus on building a great product so that when the demand is there, you have something that is best in class that people can't live without. And so that's the things that I would have to share. If you want just kind of, not necessarily sound bites, but the industries that we've seen that are more propense maybe to have more investment or seem more attractive the remote work, of course, that everyone is using Zoom and similar tools, collaboration, things related with healthcare and sustainability. It's just such a big word. There's so many things that go into it, but sustainability's been a key investment theme and will be for many years to come. And of course, e-commerce, because like Lucas was saying, with the SMBs, we had companies that pivot to serve the SMBs, or they've seen an exponential growth because the SMBs, for example, had a company called Renters here that just helps SMBs to have their products online. And with all the stores being closed, they just couldn't do any business. And this company just helped them in less than a day have an online presence and start to make businesses. And I think those type of businesses and startups will be in a better position to grow. And if they grow and they have a solid business, the investment will come as well.
I totally agree with you, Hugo. I was actually quite lucky that I was invested into an e-commerce company for 9 years, which we sold during the lockdown period, basically for 700% or 7x. So, I mean, yes, there's clearly losers and winners in that whole game, or the whole thing, what happened in this year. Last question for all 4 of you. This is a short one. This is more about like, what are your personal learnings from the work from home thing over the last couple of months? What is something you learned which works very well for you? And what did you learn also in regard of the teams which you guys manage, in regard of employee happiness and productivity during this new phase? So short one, Lucas, do you want to start?
Yes, sir. So as you know, yourself, sir, and we are working partially remote since many years. I'm used to it. I actually wrote an article about it for friends that asked me for advice. I think a key thing is when you work all remote and permanently is that you drive a proper rhythm of business. You need to keep weekly calls and other touch points with your colleagues and with your team and with your boss or bosses. And I think a learning is that, every 2 weeks when I was working from home or something, I was going to travel to one of our global offices, and I'm really missing that. I'm really missing to see all the people from the different teams. I managed to go to Germany already by train because that's easy from Switzerland. But I really miss the traveling and all the experiences around the world with different types of people. The events, actually, including yours, CERN. So, that was a learning as well. I miss traveling.
Yeah. Soon again. Holly, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, all the things about like making sure to keep to a schedule, waking up, like getting ready for the day as if you're going to the office. But I think in this world, in these times of COVID, creating space for self and your colleagues to make sure that you're maintaining your mental health. So whether that be getting up for 5 minutes to stretch or meditate, close your eyes, thinking about the day, and making sure that you're impressing that with your colleagues or your direct reports, just to make sure that we're all staying sane, because the screen time can be really intense back to back to back to back, and you don't really realize how exhausted you are at the end of the day, that you had like a full day of meetings where you have those like water cooler breaks, going up the elevator, walking outside, where you don't necessarily realize that. So that's something that's been really important for me and top of mind, to always make sure that like I'm creating space for self, to make sure that my colleagues also have that.
Thank you very much, Holly. Francesca.
I mean, very similar to what Lucas and Holly said, and I think especially in the creating a space for self, that has been super important for at least for me on the personal level. The other element that really made it easier for me was to keep convincing myself that I was on the right track professionally, right? That I was working and that I am working for a company that has a clear mission, and that clear mission will contribute to the world that we are starting to work on for today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So that also really helped me keep thinking positively, even though the reality was a bit hard to cope with.
Okay, thanks a lot, Francesca. Hugo, last word for you.
Well, I don't want to repeat what others have said, but I guess I will. Meditation. I had done meditation before, but I did meditation every day from March to July, and now kind of mixing it up. And you hear dude with the T-shirt here saying like you should meditate, and you have heard that from so many people. But I cannot tell you how much it improved. There are people do it to improve productivity. That helps as well. But just your balance. Just doing 10 minutes of breathing in the morning, first thing I did in the morning, and I found myself in meetings, being focused and being in that moment instead of being thinking about who is here next to me or who is downstairs doing something or the next meeting is going to happen, and find myself breathing during that meeting to make sure I was focused. Also helps me to be here without touching my cell phone, that type of stuff. It's really, really, really helpful, the meditation. I started to run 5K every other day, sometimes one every 3 days as well, something I was not doing. And it just felt that I accomplished something every day related with my health. So not just mental health, but also physical health. I think it's super important. And I felt accomplished besides work, because I did, as all of us, work even more because of working virtually. And so that was super helpful. And one thing that Francesca mentioned in the beginning, the thing that I still find more difficult is to keep the same level of energy throughout the day and managing the energy moments when they are most needed. It's the thing that I think we all need a little bit more of lessons learned of how to do it better. But I have a tremendous belief in our community. Now, all our communities around the world got together to, come up with different solutions to solve the problems that we're having, whether with COVID or with the consequences of COVID. So I think pretty soon we'll have some ideas as well of how to do it.
Yeah, I think you did a great summary at the end, Hugo. Like, what did we learn from the last 30 minutes? Number one, meditation is key. Number two, there are communities out there, and communities are serving a specific purpose to make companies, developers, whoever the community is served, survive. And this is what's happening. We saw it the last 6 months. It's now becoming clearer that we're not over the whole thing. We still have a way to go, but there are communities out there who serve a purpose for you guys. Back with this, thanks to all my amazing panelists here today, and back to Mohan. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Soren, for moderating that session. And thanks to all our panelists for joining from different places and different time zones. We really appreciate your insights and everything that you're doing to kind of constantly learn, but also share with the larger community, right? I think really appreciate it.